Shoot 3 menu. We've got our different picture styles here. Canon provides a large number of picture styles. Obviously, they have an automatic setting if you don't particularly care. All of these categories here are different color balance. You can hit detail set, and you can actually see. So you've got they've kind of broken it down on the Mark IV into even more customizable than on previous iterations. So you have 3 different options under sharpness here: strength, fineness, and threshold. The contrast, you can change saturation and color tone. So that's what all of these, so that's sharpness, so that's sharpness, strength, fineness, threshold, contrast, saturation, and color balance. Not color balance, color tone, my apologies. You've got all of your different options here. Again, could spend a whole nother video on this. Personally, I've shot a few projects in monochrome, and I think the DSLRs really love monochrome. You get some great dynamic range and just great looks out of it. It's very film noir stuff. You've once again got 3 user-defined. If you want to download a specific picture profile, say from Technicolor or from one of the other bloggers who have their own styles, this is where that would live. The interface with this is through the Canon software, so that will definitely require some research on that if you're going to get into that. Long exposure noise reduction. You have the option to turn that off, set it on auto, or enable. What that is if the camera detects if it's on auto or if it's enabled, then whatever it deems as a long exposure, usually anything over a second, it will do a little bit of extra processing to remove any bits of grain or noise that it finds in the image. High ISO speed noise reduction. You can either disable it or you can set it to either low, standard, or high. What that means for still images is if you're shooting at high ISOs, or you expect to be shooting at more high ISOs, then you can tell the camera that you want to make sure you have less noise. What that means on the shooting side of it is that you will end up with slightly longer processing times from shutter to shutter. So if you have it on standard or high, especially on high, and you're shooting with high ISO, every time you take a picture, the camera's going to spend an extra second or so doing more processing. Highlight tone priority is either enabled or disabled. If it's enabled, when you're shooting, you'll actually see a D+ on the bottom part of your viewfinder. You'll also see it in your top screen here. Highlight tone priority increases your dynamic range in still images. It kind of protects your highlights a little bit. If you think you're going to be shooting in an area where you've got a lot of contrast, it's nice to have on. Otherwise, it's rendering control to the camera, something that you might want control of yourself. Dust delete data, and it's changed how they do their dust delete data since I've really had to use it. So I'm just going to have to refer you to the manual on this one. Multiple exposure and HDR mode. You notice these are grayed out right now. That's because we left dual pixel RAW on, and you can't shoot in either of those modes when dual pixel RAW is on. Multiple exposure and HDR mode are 2 things that have been added to the Canon 5D Mark IV. Some extra functionality kind of for specific things. Multiple exposure, if it is enabled, you have 2 modes here: function control priority or continuous shooting priority. You would use function control priority when you want to kind of see what's going on as you're shooting. Continuous shooting means that you're continually in multiple exposure mode and you don't have to look at, you can't look at each particular function. What multiple exposure mode is it can actually shoot, it'll take multiple images and combine them into a single image. And you can control with this particular menu how they're combined. Additive means that all of the exposures are kind of added together, and that's based on a certain number of exposures. Average is the camera will take, based on the number of exposures, any exposure compensation into account. So you can really control background and foreground exposures with this option. Bright or darkness of the base image, they're compared to the base picture, and then the camera, if you tell it you want more bright or more dark, then it's actually going through and determining which areas of the camera or which areas of the image are brighter or darker, and using the multiple exposures to kind of even that out. This is different than high dynamic range or HDR photography. It's not actually using HDR in the same way. It's sort of doing a very basic version of HDR. So you would set your number of exposures here. You can shoot as few as 2 and as many as 9. Continuous multi-exposure, one shot only or continuously. So what this means is, say you set it to 5, one shot only, that means that all 5 images would be combined into one image file. If you shoot continuously, then all of the images will be kept separately. From here, you would select the image for multiple exposure. If you've already shot some things and you want to go back retroactively and use the multiple exposure functionality, then that's the button you would pick. HDR mode. HDR stands for high dynamic range. This is also a new functionality that's added to this camera. In camera, normally you would have to use Photoshop or Photomatix or one of the other HDR plugins to do HDR on your own. Disable HDR is obviously what it comes default as. You've got auto, +1, -1 exposure, and up to 3 stops of on either side of exposure. This is the different kind of blending that you will find in HDR. You really just need to mess around with it yourself, figure out what you like, figure out what looks good, and then you can kind of pick from there. Continuous HDR, set for one shot only or every shot. One shot only means once you shoot the appropriate number of images that you want for your HDR, then the camera automatically disables it. Every shot means that you have to come in here. It'll keep shooting HDR until you come in here and set it to disable HDR. Auto image align, you probably want that enabled unless you are shooting from a tripod. Enabling the auto image align means that it will probably kind of crop in. It'll remove some of the edges of your picture, so you will have a slight crop. So if you're shooting from a tripod instead of handheld, then you might turn it on disable so you retain as much of the image as possible. Save source images, by default set to all images, where it'll save your initial exposure, your under and over exposure, and then the combined HDR. Or if you want to save space, you can set it to save the HDR image only if you don't want your original exposures or any of these subsequent pictures. Moving on, shoot 4. Canon has actually included an intervalometer now within the software. So you still have your port, which is cool, but now you can actually you can have a software-controlled intervalometer. You click Enable to enable it. Either press the info button or with your touchscreen, click Detail Set. You can set your interval and select it with your quick control and change it either with your thumb wheel or with your touch screen. And then you can also tell it a certain number of shots. Set it to 0, 0, that means unlimited. It will continue shooting until it runs out of battery. Or you turn the camera off. As it says here, turning the camera off will end the interval timer. Bulb timer, disable. If you were in B mode up here, then you could set your own custom bulb timer, or set your own custom exposure mode. So if you wanted to shoot a 1:30 second exposure, then you could actually flip over to bulb mode and come in here and set it specifically, which is pretty cool functionality, especially if you're getting this camera and you don't necessarily want to bring an intervalometer, or if you don't already have one. Anti-flicker shoot is excuse me, is related obviously to the intervalometer. It is the camera looking at the exposure and making adjustments based on the previous exposure as to whether or not it needs to be darker or brighter. The issue, of course, with that is that you're rendering control to the camera with something that you might want to control yourself. So something you probably want to keep disabled. Mirror lockup functionality, when it's enabled, means that a half press of the shutter button will actually lock up the mirror in here. It will not take a picture until you do a full press of the shutter. This is handy if you're in a situation where you're doing a long exposure, or you're doing something that requires the camera not to move at all. The mirror flip up is usually a very small vibration, but if you're in a situation where you need no vibration at all, mirror lockup is what you want to use. Shoot 5, live view functionality. If for whatever reason you don't want live view to be accessible when you hit the start stop button, you can disable it from this menu. Autofocus method is live face tracking is your first option here. Flexi zone autofocus points, and that symbol there is kind of the setting between certain autofocus points, and then the square setting is different autofocus points. This is if you're in live view mode, you have autofocus available and working on your lens, and you want to use that to track faces while you're shooting. Touch shutter uses the touch screen. If you have that enabled, that means when you are in live view and you touch the screen, you'll actually take a picture. Handy if you're in a tripod situation where you don't have access to the shutter button. Grid display, you've got a few options here if you want to use live view to precisely align your shots. A 3x3 plus diagonal, 6x4, just a regular old 3x3. So you see these overlay points here. If you're using the camera to do a custom or very specific alignment, because you want the whole image, you don't want to crop into something necessarily, that's very helpful for this. Aspect ratio, 3:2, 4:3, 16:9, 1:1. What this is if you're in live view, you can set a different aspect ratio on your live view screen. So say you're at 16:9, you notice now I've got bars at the top and bottom. Say you want 4:3 standard def, I've got bars now on the sides. When you take an image from live view with the aspect ratio on, you still retain the entire image, but what changing the aspect ratio does on the back screen lets you know where, obviously for composition, or if you're aiming for standard def or high def video at the end, then you have that sort of as a guide on your live view functionality. 1:1, that's just a square. Say you're shooting for Instagram or for web delivery, and you need a square. You need to see the aspect ratio from a square instead of the full sensor size. 3:2 is the full-on sensor. Exposure simulation, what that means is while you're in live view, if it is enabled, then when you adjust your shutter setting, then this live view screen is making an assumption about what the actual picture will look like. So if I were to change my ISO or any of that, you'll actually see those changes reflected in the live view. Selecting this mode during that button press, that means that when you're going and you press the depth of field preview here, then it would also preview your exposure in terms of your shutter speed and your ISO while you're pressing that button. The lens I have on here right now is a manual focus lens, so when I press that button, it's not actually doing anything. And then you can disable. So that means that you can adjust while you're in live view, adjust your settings, and nothing changes on the live view screen. That doesn't mean that your stills will change. It just means the live view simulation is not inactive or not active. Our shoot 6, our last page, silent live view shoot, mode 1, mode 2 disable. What that does is that that softens the volume of the shutter during live view. So if you're shooting in live view and you want to be a little bit quieter while you're shooting pictures, you can turn on mode 1 or mode 2, or if you don't care, you can just disable it. Metering timer, 8 seconds. That's not just for live view, that's for everything. But while you're in live view, it means that your meter here will function for 8 seconds after you if you do a half press of the shutter button. All right, so that's the shoot menu. So if you want to, head over to facebook.com/mediaunlocked. Give us a like over there. We'll keep you posted about this camera and others as we get them. Stay tuned for our next video where we continue talking about the menu of the still settings of the Canon 5D Mark IV. And stay tuned.
Hey guys, if you'd like to check out our website where we have all kinds of fun and exciting blogs, videos, and extra information that isn't on our YouTube page, click right here. If you'd like to talk to us or contact us and kind of take a look at all the different stuff that we have going on, we've kind of funneled it all through our Facebook. You can hit our Facebook page right here and follow us or like us. Now, if you like to look at cool pictures and behind the scenes stuff, we do that on Instagram right here. So go on and follow us on Instagram. And of course, we got our cute little bird right here, Mr. Twitter, and you can follow us as we do our short tweets.